Yeah, my name's Lee. I am a fourth year PhD student at Reading University. So I've been there for quite a while now. Did my undergrad at Reading in zoology. So that's kind of studying the kind of whole spectrum of different animals we have and all the different kind of organisms from small to big. And then I came to Oxford Brookes and I did a conservation ecology master's before heading back to Reading for my PhD. So I've been there for a long time now, 4 years, and it's just focusing on hedgehogs. So obviously, you guys probably know here that hedgehogs are in decline in this country. So what I'm looking at specifically is the impact of anthropogenic food on hedgehogs. So anthropogenic food just means food that's provided by humans. Anything that's got anthro in it means something that's either provided by or caused by humans. So anthropogenic is just a sciencey term for food that humans give. So basically, I'm studying anything to do with their food, basically. And I'll talk to you about my project, Hogs On Film. So firstly, I just wanted to go over what is a hedgehog, right? You laugh, you probably all know what a hedgehog is. But a few things that we know, we've studied them quite well in this country. All the early research was done from like the 50s to the 80s. We had quite a lot of really good quality research that was done. And basically, it was generally men who went around following hedgehogs and writing down what they were doing. And they said that they are nocturnal animals, they are solitary animals, they're insectivorous, they're non-territorial nest builders, and they hibernate throughout winter. So they're what us scientists call a really highly derived animal. This just means that they're really unique. They've got all these features that are quite unique. So obviously being nocturnal and hibernating, that's really unique to, there's nothing else in this country really that does these kind of things. So obviously they went around, they studied them, and they said that these are the things that make up a hedgehog. These are real hedgehog characteristics. And I just want you to bear that in mind because at the end, we'll come back to this point. So when you're looking for hedgehogs, we used to find them kind of all the way across rural England. We'd find them in hedgerow habitat and woodland, particularly where it was like woodland bordering on a rural area or an agricultural area. We'd find them in open grassland and farmland, and we'd find them in towns and cities. But their range where they live is shifting now. So we're finding them less so in agricultural areas and open farmland areas, and more so in these towns and cities. And part of the reason for this is because back in 1945, so after post-war Britain, our kind of government needed to ramp up agricultural productivity. So we took out a lot of our hedgerows and we made our fields a lot bigger. And this has really hit a lot of animals and species that need hedgerows to survive. So now we don't tend to find them so much in these agricultural areas and these kind of rural areas, but their populations tend to be stabilizing or even getting bigger in towns and cities now. So bye-bye hedgehogs. But towns and cities, we've got them here. So that's a great thing for us to know. So when those guys were out there studying hedgehogs, they did a lot of research on what they eat. So most of the time they're either walking around actually counting what the hedgehogs were eating, actually watching them eating. And then some other kind of lab-based studies were done. A lot of it was either fecal analysis, so that's just looking at poo, or stomach analysis. So stomach content analysis, we don't really like to use that now because you need a dead animal. If the animal was already dead, then that's fine, but we don't want to go out killing animals that are endangered, just to look at what they ate for their last meal. So these kind of methods are really good. They provided us a lot of information about their diet, but they do kind of have limitations. Obviously, when you're looking at stomach contents or poo, what you're actually looking at is undigested parts. So you're not looking at what has been digested. You're looking at the remains of what you can identify. So these are kind of some of the limitations that we've got to this kind of old style of research that used to be more prominent. Also, when you're looking at stomach or poo contents, you're looking at a really short window of consumption. So obviously I said a hedgehog is an insectivore, so they've got quite a short digestive tract. It's not like a herbivore, which has got lots of convoluted kind of intestines. Theirs is more like a carnivore, so it's short and it's fast. So what they eat kind of comes out within 6 hours. So it's a short-term window of consumption that you're looking at when you're looking at these. More recently, we've had things like DNA analysis, so we can use molecular analysis to kind of identify what species were in the poo or in the stomach. But again, you're still looking at that kind of short-term consumption. So I'm not going to talk to you in depth about this, but the kind of research that I'm doing now at University of Reading is something called stable isotope analysis. So I'll just introduce you to that. It's really, really sciencey, so don't worry too much if you're confused. So basically, what I'm looking at is long-term diet patterns. So when we're eating our food is made of atoms, and atoms come in different weights. The different weights are what make them either stable or unstable. So most things that are living on Earth are made of, well, they have 5 elements in them. They've got carbon, they've got nitrogen, they've got sulfur, they've got oxygen, and did I say hydrogen already? Hydrogen. So we can use those elements, the ones that are stable, we can use them to study what that animal's been eating over a longer term period by looking at things like nails or teeth or hair, or in the case of hedgehogs, I've been looking at their spines, fur, and their whiskers. So through this kind of methodology, I'm able to trace their diet over a really long-term period because it takes a long time for them to grow spines. So you've got a record of their general diet over that time period. It won't tell you what brand of food they ate, but it will tell you the kind of groups of foods that they were eating from. So this is the kind of new methodology that I've been working on in the lab. And to complement this, I've set up this project, Hogs on Film, really. So when those guys were out there identifying prey, they identified invertebrates to be our kind of main food group. So we're looking at worms, slugs and snails, beetles and caterpillars. Also, a lot of their diet is made up of larvae. So things like fly larvae, crane fly larvae, they love those. Obviously, beetles are larvae before they're adults, so they eat those as well. Slugs and snails, it kind of depends what's available. Sometimes they eat them, sometimes they don't eat them. But really, what they eat is kind of a wide range of invertebrates, and they'll change their diet depending on what's available. So if it's really dry, there might be less beetle larvae available. They might have burrowed deeper down into the soil when it's a drought period. If it's raining, there's probably going to be a lot of worms on the surface area. So hedgehogs are able to kind of vary their diet depending on what's available and also what's available throughout the year. So things that are out and about in spring, you might have more slugs and snails in spring, whereas you might not get caterpillars until summer. So they change their diet depending on what's available. They also will eat vertebrate prey. So usually this will be roadkill or carrion, but we have seen them eating things like frogs and toads and chicks, fledglings, eggs. So ground nesting birds, they're at risk. But really, they're kind of really highly adapted to eat these kind of animals. These are their mainstay. So as I mentioned, hedgehogs are really in decline in this country. The story of their decline isn't uniform. They're not in decline everywhere. And there are some places in the UK where actually we don't want hedgehogs. So, but in England, they are in decline. Their species has plummeted, their levels have plummeted. And we think this is to do with the kind of wide landscape change that's happened to our rural areas. So obviously, we've got intensive agriculture, and then we're removing all those habitats that I was talking about that they really need to survive. I mean, if you build nests out of leaves and there's no hedgerows, what are you going to make your nest out of? There's nowhere for them to stay. So really, we want to kind of identify what risks are keeping their numbers down and look towards building them up and what we can do as humans to help improve their numbers. So this brings me on to my project. So Hogs on Film. So basically, I started Hogs on Film back in 2023. So when I started my PhD, I was advised, go out and read everything you can read about hedgehogs and then come back, tell me what the gaps are, and then figure out a question or work out how you can identify those gaps and what you can do to work towards answering those questions. So I did, I went and I read everything. I read about all the guys that had been out doing these kind of stomach contents analysis and all these other really good in-depth analysis. And what I found was there's been quite a lull in observations of hedgehog behavior between the kind of 80s and now. So this is kind of strange because technology is advanced and their behavior has changed. So I kind of made this project to bridge a gap. So we've got the information that we already know about hedgehogs from all those old analysis. And then I realized that there's loads of people out there who are filming and feeding hedgehogs in their gardens. So those people are collecting data every single night. And if that data doesn't get captured, then us who are behind the desks don't know what's going on. So this is kind of to bridge that gap and to provide a platform for that data to go somewhere. So then we can really start looking at it and start figuring out what are the risks and identifying how we can help work together and make sure we're all cohesively working to save our little hedgehog friends. So the information that I've included in this presentation is all the stuff from our first 16 months of doing the project. So I've got a lot more now, but I haven't had time to go through it yet. Luckily, hedgehogs have a hibernation period. So in that time, I go through all the data and then I work out the stats from the previous year. So the stuff that's in here is the stuff from our first kind of 16 months of looking at hedgehogs. And people would basically just go on our website, they send us videos, they fill out a survey, they tell us what the hedgehogs were doing in their garden and what they fed their hedgehogs, and all that data I just collect it in and then I tell you guys. So I'll talk to you a bit about what we found. So our main aims for the Hogs on Film project is to identify how hedgehogs are behaving in gardens. So obviously, those people who did research before were saying they were solitary, they were saying they were non-territorial, and they were saying they weren't aggressive. But those were hedgehogs in open areas. They were in large parks, they were in golf courses, they were in rural areas. So like our gardens are very different to that. So it's likely that their behavior is going to be very different when they're in a different environment. So that was one of my big aims to look at, is how are they behaving when they're in a garden? How does that compare to how they behave in the wild or in a natural environment? And to understand the kind of species dynamics that we've got occurring in our gardens. Like a lot of you have pets. I've got 2 cats. My neighbour's got 2 cats. The neighbour after that's got 2 cats. We've all got animals in our garden that aren't just wild animals. We've got domestic ones as well. And they're all kind of intermingling, and seeing what kind of species dynamics are happening in our gardens quite interesting. And to build up data on the types of foods being provided. So we know obviously what they used to eat, but a kind of real emerging field is hedgehog feeding. And it sits in a quite grey area, which I've been following quite closely. So I want to keep an eye on the types of food that are being provided. And then to identify any potential risk areas. So obviously, in our gardens, like I said, the dynamics are different. There's different risks associated being in gardens. So I really wanted to keep an eye on things and identify if there's anything happening that we can work better to work on together. So firstly, what are hedgehogs' behavior like around a garden feeding station? Not surprisingly, the most commonly reported behavior was feeding and then drinking. But we did have people seeing all kinds of really interesting things. And we had courtship going on, we had grooming going on, we had self-anointing going on, we had a lot of fights going on. So it wasn't just that they were coming into our gardens to eat, they were coming in to do their whole kind of suite of behaviors. I did actually have to add in these new categories at the end, which are some really hedgehog-specific categories. So I added these in the last month of our study last year because I had so many comments from people who'd completed their surveys saying things like there was huffing and puffing, it sounded like a ruckus in the garden, there was an argy-bargy, there was just, people would send all these comments. So I thought, okay, I'm going to put in a category for huffing and snorting or pushing and shoving because it seemed to be the most commonly reported thing that they were doing. So again, bearing in mind that these are non-aggressive, non-territorial animals, but the comments that were starting to come through seem to be saying the inverse to what our research suggests. So I think we have 8 in that picture right now. They weren't coming into our gardens in solitary amounts either. So solitary animals usually only come together to mate in the wild. That doesn't look like a solitary buffet to me. That looks like a party. So hedgehogs are coming in our gardens in much bigger numbers than we'd expect to see them in the wild. All the kind of past hedgehog researchers, Derek Yalden, Nigel Reeve, they all said that they would be non-territorial, that they'd avoid each other. So they were thinking it was something to do with either auditory or olfactory cues, that they would sense that there's another hedgehog in the area and they'd just avoid each other. If you eat insects as well, your prey is kind of everywhere, it's ubiquitous, so you don't need to defend a territory. So it doesn't make sense for them to come into contact with each other. So this is very different to the picture of what we have of our past research of them being solitary animals and avoiding each other. This looks like, yeah, dinner with friends, doesn't it? But despite the fact that people did have actually hedgehogs coming into their gardens in larger numbers than we've seen in the wild, the hedgehogs did prefer to eat alone. So they still prefer to be on their own, but some of them are actually kind of putting up with each other a bit, some better than others, which is different to what the research says. So what about all those species dynamics that are happening in gardens? So most of the time, 2/3 of the time, we had more than just hedgehogs coming into gardens. So people are putting out food for hedgehogs. That's their target species. That's the species that they want to attract to their garden. But most of the time, people are finding that other animals are coming as well. And despite the fact that lots of them were coming into the gardens, they also preferred to eat at different times as well. Number one recorded animal, of course, is hedgehogs. We've got lots of hedgehogs. But if we count slugs, they were only 52% of the animals that we recorded. We wanted to count slugs. You might think, oh, that's a bit strange. They're not really animals, but they are animals. And they're very important animals, actually, because not only are they a prey species for the hedgehog, but they're also quite an important transmitter of parasitic diseases. So I wanted to keep an eye on this because we want to know if garden feeding is going to increase the likelihood of parasite transmission as well. This is also our minimum count of slugs as well. Basically, I asked people if they found any slugs when they'd replenished their food bowl. Sometimes people would say we saw one on camera, but we didn't find it at the bowl. So this is a minimum count. This is the amount that people found in and around the feeding station when they went to clean it or replenish the food bowl. So the likelihood is there's a lot more than this in our gardens. And then, of course, cats. Does anyone in here feed hedgehogs, by the way? Yeah, you know all about cats then. Cats are magical contortionists. They will get into a feeding station. And if you're putting out food for wild animals, you're definitely feeding your neighbor's cats. We also had smaller animals. We had rats and mice, foxes, which was always lovely to see. We have birds, which tend to come in the kind of dawn hours, especially in summer when dusk is really early in the morning, and then you'll get all the birds coming in to clean up. And then some other species like squirrels. When we had the other species, we actually had voles, shrews, mice. We had a polecat as well. So we've got a whole range of animals that are coming into our gardens. It's not just hedgehogs. And of course, one toad last year as well. Very proud of that. But no badgers on this list. Anyone who's worried about badgers, you shouldn't. So yeah, as you can see, we've got a real range of animals coming here, and it's not just domestic, it's not just wild, it's a mix of both. So they're all kind of benefiting from the food that's going in our gardens. So although we had all these species coming, they preferred to eat at a different time as well. So a lot of the time, the animals would just come at different times. If it was a cat would come next to a hedgehog and the hedgehog would just ball up. So a cat is no bother to a hedgehog. Foxes would share the bowls with hedgehogs. Cats do not share the bowls with foxes. If you are worried about foxes in your garden, don't worry, because if you have a cat, the cat is the top dog in the situation here. I saw a lot of cats having fights with foxes and seeing the fox off every single time. So yeah, as you can see, lots of different animals sharing the spot. They're all benefiting from the food as well. And they're kind of doing it in mainly a kind of passive and a relaxed way. And here's lots of our lovely species that we've had. So we've got a mouse up there, mouse up there. We have a few rats. That's the polecat we got last year, which I was really happy about. And this year we've had muntjacs coming, and our first badger in a garden has been reported this year. So that photo is from this year. And again, no one was harmed. They both ate from the bowl and they're all cool. So what about the foods that's being provided? Now, this is something that I'm really quite passionate about. Food is so key to our nutrition, our well-being, our longevity, and our behavior. Like if you've eaten some food that doesn't agree with you, you're probably going to be grumpy. So it might influence the way that you respond to others. And the same is for animals as well. If an animal is eating an improper diet, it might be more reactive, it might be more snappy, it might be more miserable. So food is something that really, it kind of, you have to think about it quite holistically. Most people who are feeding hedgehogs will be feeding them what we call hedgehog feed. Uh, hedgehog feed, some people think is insects. This is branded hedgehog feed. So most people, 54% were feeding branded hedgehog feed, 42 were giving what's branded as cat food. And then we had some people giving other things like roast chicken, pate, beef suet, pork, things that maybe were either leftovers that they might have had and thought, oh, there's a hedgehog in the garden, I want to feed it. So kind of wide scale, different things going out there, but I want to keep an eye on the hedgehog feed. So you might actually be surprised to hear that at my last count, there was 42 brands of hedgehog feed available on the market within the UK. And these products are not covered by any legislation. So there's no standards for what ingredients need to go in there or what ingredients don't need to be in there. There's also not any kind of minimum standards for the analytical constituents. So the fat, the protein, the fiber, they can kind of put anything in it and they can, as long as it agrees with the legislation surrounding packaging, it can go on the market. So whilst there's a really wide range to buy and they all look really good when you look at the packaging, it's really, really, really important when you're providing hedgehog food to have a look at the ingredients and be quite critical when you're looking at the ingredients. Wild animals are not protected by the same legislation that is protected for domestic species. So cat food has minimum and maximum amounts of certain ingredients and compositions that have to be in it, but not the same for hedgehogs. So ignore the smiley hedgehog on the packaging. That does not tell you what's inside it. Just really read it, please. A lot of these things are really unsuitable. And so in my research, when I'm doing stable isotope analysis, looking at hedgehog spines, I've taken all these brands of food into the lab. So this here is just to kind of show you how diverse the brands are. So all those ones that are on that list, I've taken them all into the lab. And what this shows us here is the nitrogen in the products and the carbon that's in the products. So we've got cat food kind of here and here. This is chicken-based foods up this line. That's fish-based foods. So that's cat food that's got a marine carbon source in it. But you can really see, so cat food is regulated, and that's why they're in these two boxes and they're quite uniform. Hedgehog food, we've got a real variety. We've got some with so little nitrogen, it's got less nitrogen in it than chicken breast off the supermarket. So nitrogen is an essential kind of element that we need to build our DNA, our proteins, our cells. Nitrogen is essential for us to kind of look after our body. So the variability in products is kind of really strange and quite amazing. And we know that their diet has changed significantly. So again, this is my research on hedgehog spines. So what I did, I came here as well. I came to Oxford Museum. I went to lots of other museums, and I took spines from museum preserved hedgehogs. So these are ones that had lived, you know, some of them were from the 80s, some of them were from 1905. So I collected all these different spines and I took them into the lab and I analyzed their carbon and nitrogen, and I've mapped them here in their time periods. So the modern day hedgehogs are all the ones in green over here, and the ones that are pre-1945 or 1946 to 1993 are over here a bit. What this shows is that their diet has changed significantly from the past. So we do know that their diet has changed significantly, and we know the foods that are available now are quite different and diverse in their contents. So now we're trying to work out, obviously, what are the risks of this kind of diet? What does anthropogenic food, is that good for their nutrition? Is it not? We don't know. That's quite simply put the answer. So on to my last kind of point. What are the risks that we've identified with hedgehogs being fed in our gardens? I mentioned slugs and snails. So 52% of people said no, they didn't see slugs, but 42% said yes. And we had that count of how many slugs were recorded. Now, while parasites are a normal part of a healthy hedgehog's ecology, and we shouldn't be kind of over cleaning the world, trying to destroy every parasite, a normal healthy hedgehog will have multiple parasites living in it, and it will maintain that burden absolutely fine, no problem. But if we've got hedgehogs that are coming into contact with other hedgehogs that are unwell, if they're coming into a garden in large numbers, if they're eating a food that's unsuitable for them, if they're having arguments and things like that, then their kind of health might decline. And it's at that time when parasites are likely to take over and then they get really unwell. Now, when I went around and I asked a load of hedgehog rehabbers what was their number one illness that hedgehogs were getting admitted to them for, they said lungworm infection. And lungworm infection is caused by a parasitic nematode. So it's a little teeny weeny little worm. And this worm has got a kind of 3-stage life cycle. It starts as a little egg. The egg gets eaten or absorbed by a slug or a snail. The slug or the snail then gets kind of overburdened, and then it either gets eaten or comes into very, very close contact with the hedgehog. If the hedgehog's eaten it, it then coughs up the worms, and the worms go into its lungs, and it becomes very, very unwell. So that's why we wanted to keep an eye on our slugs. And although a lot of people said that there were slugs there, we want to make sure people who are trying to keep their slug numbers down are doing it the right way. So not putting out poisons, not putting out things that could then kind of impact the hedgehogs down the line or any of the other animals that are coming into your garden, because you don't want to poison your neighbor's cat, and you don't want to poison the hedgehogs. So that's one of the things that we are keeping an eye on, like whether these points where food are in our garden, is there an increased risk of parasites being transferred? And there might be. We don't know 100% yet, but there might be. So it's still worth keeping an eye on. So it brings me on nicely to my next point, poo. So I've been asking people to report to me if the hedgehog had pooed in the food bowl or within a kind of meter of the feeding station. And hedgehogs are really messy eaters. They will poo in the bowl, they will poo everywhere around the bowl, they don't care. 1/3 of instances we had poo either in the bowl, in the feeding station, or within a meter. So again, when we're thinking about that parasite risk, it's so easy to keep that down. All you need to do is use soap and water, clean the bowl, clean any poo, things like that. We tend to forget when things are in our garden. We think, oh, the bird feed is out there and it's outside, it gets rained on, it's going to be fine. But the things that are going to make our animals unwell are the things that will exist through the rain and the elements outside. So things like viruses and parasitic diseases. So it's really important just to use warm soapy water, just like you would with your cat or your dog bowl. And another thing that we identified as a potential risk area is aggression. So although we only had 101 instances where the hedgehogs were actually interacting with the hedgehog, 18 of them were aggressive. So that's quite high. Like just about 18% of them were aggressive interactions. So that's quite a high proportion of interactions that were actually aggressive. And again, so if they're coming into our gardens in elevated numbers and they're coming over to a food bowl, you've got a really concentrated source of kind of food there in maybe one location. There are kind of various ways that you can use to minimize aggression when you're feeding a wild animal. Some people put out multiple food bowls, so there's other areas for the hedgehogs to go. Some people use like a perspex or glass-fronted feeding station. So the animal can see if there's another animal in there and it can decide whether it wants to go in or not. I'd always advise to have a feeding station that's got more than one entrance and exit, so that if the hedgehog goes in, it can quickly go out if it needs to get out or if it feels threatened. And also there are other ways that you can consider feeding animals that will help to reduce this aggression. Some people don't have a feeding station at all. They have a kind of semi-enclosed area. So maybe under a chair or like under a little platform, they'll just put a bowl there. So they're not completely enclosed. Like animals respond differently in an enclosed environment. They've got boundaries so they can't get out. So they might be a bit more likely to attack each other. And then, of course, you could try scatter feeding the food. So if you scatter feed, not only are you going to stop the animals from gathering in one point where they're likely to have a fight, you're also helping to kind of keep that foraging instinct alive, and you're inviting them to kind of root around the garden. So maybe they'll find some of their natural prey at the same time. So it's just other things to consider when you are feeding hedgehogs in your garden. So what about aggression between species? So that was aggression within our species. So interspecies aggression was quite high, 18%. Between species, it was quite low, actually. So we only had 6 incidences where hedgehog and another species were aggressive towards each other. 2 of them were a rat biting a hedgehog. One of them was when the hedgehog thought, I don't want to be bitten anymore, and it barged that rat back. We had one time when a cat and a fox were fighting over the food, and the hedgehog was just sat in the bowl going huff, puff, huff, puff, and spiking up. So that was aggressive all around. And then we had one time when a hedgehog ate a slug on camera, only once. And then we had one incident of a fox attacking a hedgehog. And this was very strange. You don't need to worry because the fox came in, it bit the hedgehog, quickly realized what a mistake it had made, dropped the hedgehog, ran away, and then the hedgehog unrolled and walked off happy as Larry. So actually, despite the fact that we've got all this range of animals coming into gardens, they're not actually much of a risk to each other when it comes to aggression. It's the kind of, the hedgehogs are fighting with the hedgehogs. The hedgehogs aren't fighting with the foxes, the cats, and all the other creatures. So also our gardens aren't just kind of places that they come for feeding. Like our gardens do pose a load of other risks as well. And we get entanglements, we get plastic pollution, we get pond drowning hedgehogs, we get toxic kind of pollutants in their systems from pesticides, herbicides, slug pellets. Our gardens are kind of really quite dangerous areas for a hedgehog to be in, and there are a lot of other risks. So when we're inviting animals into our garden, or even if we're not inviting animals in, if they've decided to come in, it's quite important to be kind of mindful that things that we don't consider a risk could really be life and death to a small animal, and just try and make the effort to clean up. You know, if there's netting left in your garden, pop it away so nothing ends up in it. Again, if your neighbor's cat got entangled in it, you'd be mortified. So same goes for wildlife as well. We just need to be mindful of minimizing those risks. So also there's been some new research looking into other ways that human behavior is actually impacting our hedgehog behavior. And some of this research has been done. Some of them are researchers from my university, and others from around Europe as well, and Burgers in Germany. So they've been looking at things like the impact of supplemental feeding on their hibernation behavior. And what we're finding is actually that a lot of the time when you're providing a steady source of food, hedgehogs are changing their hibernation behavior. They're not going into hibernation, or they're going into hibernation for a little while and then coming back out of it. And this is really interesting because this is actually impacting their evolution. It's evolution in action, really, when you watch it. When the hedgehogs go into hibernation, it kind of coincides with obviously our winter period. And in our winter period, all our inverts kind of go into dormancy. So a lot of them will burrow deeper into the soil or become less mobile. So they've evolved to hibernate at a time when their prey is least available. But when we're providing food all year round, this is changing that. So obviously, then they're out in the winter in the snow. And I don't know if you've ever looked at what's underneath a hedgehog's spines, but it's bald underneath. So they've got no fur under those spines. They're really poor insulation kind of. So this is another thing. It's just an interesting way that human activity is actually influencing them in a way that we might not have considered. And also there's other research has been done here on the impact of artificial lighting as well. So again, lighting in our gardens, security lights, some people leave them on constantly. That will impact the behavior of the animals there. They respond to photoperiod often when it's hibernation. So these are actually ways that we're influencing their physiological responses, their biological clock, doing things that we might not even consider that we're doing to them. So just something to bear in mind, really. But why does it all matter? Why does it all matter? Good question. So if I draw us back to my original point about what is a hedgehog, what makes a hedgehog a hedgehog? What did all those researchers doing all that research find out about hedgehogs? They said that they were nocturnal. They said they were nest builders, insectivorous, solitary, non-territorial, and they hibernate. But as I've just mentioned, they're starting to not hibernate throughout the winter. They're changing that in response to our lighting and in response to the food that we're providing. They're not acting non-territorially. They're starting to kind of display dominance behaviors and aggression around food bowls. So that's not being non-territorial. That's being quite clearly territorial about their food. They're obviously not being solitary in our gardens. They're coming into contact with two or more quite often. And if we're feeding them food that doesn't have insects in it, are they really insectivorous anymore? So these ways that they're changing right now, and ways that anthropogenic influences are changing their behavior and their biology, their physiology. So these are things, influences that are happening right now. What are we left with, really? Hedgehogs are nocturnal and they build nests. But again, if we don't have hedges in our gardens, what are they going to build their nests out of? So we've got to make sure we leave some leaves for them as well. So just to round up, the project is still ongoing. We have got a website platform now. It's really easy. Anyone who already does film and feed hedgehogs, you're already doing the hard work. You're already setting up cameras. You're putting out food. You're watching it. That's all the hard stuff. All that I'm doing is providing a platform for you to go and send all those videos, log all that activity, and then we can really kind of look at these things, look at how the behavior is changing, identify the risks, and then, yeah, work towards communicating people. How can we work better? If we are providing their mainstay, then we can kind of make sure the food is better quality and things like that. Because we really need to work together if we're going to help our hedgehogs in our urban areas. So the project itself is growing. I've been able to meet lots of lovely people and do lots of talks, so that's really great. And we've got a lot of people signed up to our web platform. Right now, as I said, the hedgehogs are in hibernation or supposedly in hibernation. So we've got a break from now until March where we don't take on any new data. But then when March comes around next year, if you are filming and feeding hedgehogs, or if you know anyone who's filming or feeding hedgehogs, or if you want to start filming and feeding hedgehogs, just go on our website, follow us on social media, and then you can get a camera and start sending us all your lovely data. And hopefully this will play. Yay! So here's just a little compilation of some of these behaviors that we have been recording. So obviously, a lot of people have got a setup like this. They've got an enclosed feeding station. Hedgehog comes in, gets their nice bowl. That's one which has got more than one exit and entrance, which of course is very useful when a hedgehog wants to kind of sneak out the back and doesn't want to share the bowl. We do find that hedgehogs have personalities as well. So some of them are more likely to be social, whereas others are not. I don't know what went wrong on this dinner date as well, because it seemed like it was going fine, and then it doesn't go fine. See, I didn't think anything happened, but hey, what do we know? And this is quite typical hedgehog behavior, ramming each other, bowling each other. It can look quite aggressive sometimes, but one thing you have to remember is all those spines provide quite a lot of cushioning. So a lot of the time, although it can look quite aggressive, they're actually not kind of getting hurt at skin level. Again, water, really crucial and really important in the summer months. We see a lot of, this is what I like to call hedgehog bowling. Bye-bye. Again, we've got slugs eating from the food bowl there. So we've got our prey species just happily eating the food as well. This one's going to sneak out the back. This guy doesn't mind. And here we've got a cat. Cats are so greedy as well. As soon as you get a camera, you'll just realize how much they're being fed by other people. But again, that's something you really need to bear in mind when you're providing the food, because A lot of other people provide their domestic animals with specific food, like grain-free diets, for example, which if they're going to go eating a posh diet with you and then they go to the neighbors and they get fed a load of grains and cereals, it kind of undoes all your work. I always love seeing the foxes as well. Sneaky little rat. And we've got our little mouse over there. This is a puppy pad. This is a method that some of my participants use to keep slugs out, and apparently it's quite effective. So again, in the morning, we tend to get a lot of birds kind of come in to investigate. They don't tend to come at night, and obviously not into a box. And then we had a little muntjac visiting earlier in the year. And there's our muntjac at night time, and a nice slug there again, making its way to the feeding station. It's quite interesting as well because slugs actually can remember where a food bowl is and they can go back. There's been some studies on cognition. And our lovely badger. So that was the first time we've had someone send in a video of a badger and a hedgehog sharing a garden. Now this is quite interesting. We've seen lots of this, and a lot of people might think this is aggressive behavior, but it's actually the hedgehog's courtship ritual. So the male will go around the outside whilst the female kind of backs into a corner going, no, don't go behind me. It doesn't look like a lot of fun to me. It does look quite intimidating. This is a bit explicit. He didn't even let her finish her meal. I don't think she's too happy. They've got quite an impressively sized penis, though. You can see how long their legs are in this video as well, if I draw your attention away from what's happening. Nice long legs. There we go. And, all the eating makes them sleepy at the end. It's always cute when you get to see juveniles as well. Sometimes you'll see the mum and then you'll see little juveniles start coming out with her, and it's quite cute. You like to think, oh, they're showing them where to get their food and they're teaching them everything. So there we go. So that's some of the kind of video footage that we get sent. As you can see, we kind of get the whole spectrum of things. So it's not just feeding that they're doing out gardens, and people are collecting really great video footage. Some of this stuff ecologists would only dream of getting to see. But because we've got technology now, we've got access to this in our gardens. So we can look at conservation in a completely different way, utilizing this technology and bringing it in a way where it involves the public as well. And it gives you kind of, value and a sense of contributing to conservation science as well. So that's it. This is where you can find us. We're kind of all over social media. Our website's going to get a new revamp this winter period, so it will be up and running even better and hopefully more user-friendly come the spring when they come back in. But if you've ever got any questions or anything, you can ping me a message on any of those. It's usually me who replies to everything, so you'll get a message from me directly. And that's it, really. So any questions from anyone? Ask away. You can ask me anything. It doesn't have to be about Hogs on Film. It can be about hedgehogs in general. Hello. Perfect question. So if you look on the packaging, what you want to find is something that has got low cereals, grains, nuts. So nothing with sunflower seeds, nothing with peanuts, nothing with wheat, nothing with soya. Most of the companies, the hedgehog feed companies, are actually owned by birdseed companies. So you'll see lots of birdseed ingredients going into them, but they're not evolved to handle those kinds of foods. Their digestive system can't cope with it, and they actually don't have the right kind of teeth to eat that kind of food. So you want to look for something that's got high meat content. If you can find something that's got high invertebrate content, that's even better. But not just mealworms, because the issue when they're eating mealworms is they're getting one species to eat, so they're still not eating a balanced diet there. So they might get a big bowl filled with one species, whereas their natural diet is, of course, lots of different species. So if you can't find something that's got more than like 3 invertebrates as its ingredients, Look for something that's got high meat content. Look for dry foods as opposed to wet foods, just because it helps to keep their teeth clean. Wet foods tends to get stuck in their teeth and leads to kind of gum disease and tartar and all that horrible stuff. So yeah, if you try and look for stuff that doesn't have honey, muesli, seeds, like stuff that might be good for us is not good for them. They like bugs, they like worms, they like all that stuff. Hiya.
Yes, somebody who puts up hedgehogs in winter to take care of them just told us to get Tesco's kitty food, small grains, because what do you think about?
Wow, I've been looking, so in the lab, I've looked at loads of different brands. I have got some research coming out soon where I'll be able to provide a bit more guidance about what needs to be in it. Kitten food is probably okay for them, but again, like even our cat food is filled with grains. It's quite shocking actually when you start looking into legislation and asking questions about why is this so cheap and what is all that vegetable products. Usually it will say animal products and vegetable products, and you're like, well, what does that mean? So yeah, just try and look for something that's got less of those vegetable products, whatever they may be. If it says it's got animal derivatives, again, that's not necessarily good because that's often a lot of bone meal and blood meal and things like that. So it'll be the lower quality meats and things. So just cat food is fine. Kitten food's better because it's smaller pieces, so it's easy for them to eat. And it is kind of regulated to a degree, so it will have certain elements and certain kind of amino acids will be in it and won't be in it. So it's probably better for them to get kitten food. So a lot of my participants as well feed them Tesco kitten food. Hiya. Again, this is a tricky question. I wish I could say, is cat food better than hedgehog food? Yeah, I wish I could say cat food is great, hedgehog food's rubbish, but it really is a brand on brand thing. A lot of cat food is okay, a lot of cat not okay. The manufacturers really get away with a whole lot when they're putting things into a pellet because they're taking a bunch of ingredients and they're kind of making it into a shape. So you have no idea what's in there, really. And a lot of the time they don't declare what's in there and they don't have to legally declare what's in there as well. So it's not 100% one way and it's not 100% the other way. I've seen some brands of hedgehog food are good. There is one called Nature's Grub, which is made of powdered worms, powdered snails, powdered beetles, which sounds horrible, but it sounds great for them. I'm not sponsored by them, but it's one that I have seen and I've taken into the lab, and some of the analysis I've done has come out saying it's one of the closest to their natural diet. So, anyone else? Hi.
I've got two. One is what got me interested.
Yeah.
And when you talk about grooming, what's the first one? Tell them to improve themselves.
Yeah, so your first question was about what got me involved in hedgehogs. Well, they're quite interesting. They're basically, I'm not a person who's always loved hedgehogs. There's nothing wrong with them. They've just never been my top animal. And then when this PhD came up, the person who supervises me, he's a specialist in foxes and hedgehogs. So I knew when I was doing this PhD, I'd either be working on foxes or hedgehogs, and I was cool with either of them. And then it turned out to be hedgehogs. And then obviously, the more I've researched about them, the more kind of, when you start doing research on something, you end up with more questions than you do answers. Once you answer one question, it asks another question and another and another. And then you kind of got all these avenues in your head that you're like, well, what about this? What about that? So it's really that with hedgehogs. Like I started out thinking, oh yeah, they're just hedgehogs. And then I started looking into things to do with their morphology, their bones, like their diet, their enzymes in their stomach, all these things. And I'm like, wow, actually, they're really amazingly evolved to handle invertebrates, even down to their stomach acids. They get their fiber from chitin, which is what makes up the exoskeletons of most inverts. So whereas we get our fiber from cellulose, from plant material, they get it from chitin. So even that, they're so evolved to suit that little niche that they occupy. So really it was that. They're just quite cool. When you start looking into it, you're like, wow, they are really unique, aren't they? Like, and your next question was about grooming. Yeah, they don't groom each other. They are not friends with each other. They do a lot of grooming of themselves because, again, they've got fur on their underside and no fur on their back. So it's quite awkward for them to clean themselves. Their spines get filled with all kinds of stuff. And like when they're walking through the undergrowth, it kind of gets wedged in there and it's quite hard for them to get out. Actually, one of the museum curators I worked with said she hates her hedgehog collection because of that, because she said as soon as she cleans them, they've just got dirt stuck in them and they're not moving. They're stuffed hedgehogs and they're filled with dirt. So you can imagine one that's walking around in your garden through hedges and through leaves. It's got all kinds of things stuck in there. But they also they're quite prone to fleas, ticks, all those lovely ectoparasites. But they're quite acrobatic. They can get their foot kind of onto their back. So you do see funny videos of them stood at a food bowl and then 1 minute they're eating, the next minute their foot's kind of up there and then they're on their back. But yeah, and then they also do an important kind of activity called self-anointing. So this is a really weird thing that they do. So sometimes you don't know why they're doing it. If they come across an interesting smell, so interesting to a hedgehog, not to a human, they might lava it up in their mouth, chew up the thing, lava it up in their mouth, and they put it in their spines. And they've been observed doing this in response to poo, fox poo, cigarettes, turpentine, paint, like things like that, battery acid. We've had reports of hedgehogs licking these things and then they'll kind of foam it up in their mouth and put the spit all over their spines. Some researchers think it's to help, again, as like an anti-predator deterrent or as an anti kind of ectoparasite deterrent. Because if you've got something horrible in your spines, then fleas aren't going to want to bite you. So we also do see videos of that. So yeah, you never really know what you're going to get when you start watching the video. Thank you. Anyone else? Hi.
How long do they live?
Good question. So in the wild, on average, they'll live for 3 years. Females tend to live a little bit longer than males. This is because males tend to roam when they're looking for females. So they're more likely to get hit by cars. We have had some older individuals surviving in the wild, and we have had some much older individuals surviving in captivity, but they really start to look their age. Once they hit 4, they'll have their spines hanging out. They'll be grumpy. They don't fare very well. One of my colleagues over in Denmark, she did some research and she found a hedgehog that she thought was 16 years old. So they can live older than 3, but in the wild, the average kind of life expectancy is 3. Yeah. You right?
Actually, like many other people, I enjoy watching hedgehogs, and it's nice to have them in your garden, film them. From a biodiversity point of view, for maintaining our natural suite of animals in the country, what do you think? Should people feed hedgehogs?
Yeah, this is a very good question as well. We've got quite a big research division in Reading in the School of Agriculture. We've got a team that have been looking at the impacts of feeding wild animals and asking that question, like, should we be feeding wild animals? Because that is the thing. When we're feeding an animal, it seems quite innocent when we're doing it, but we are influencing its behavior, its adaptation, and then eventually its kind of evolution, whether it's domesticated, whether it's reliant on us, things like that, or whether it is wild and still kind of retains all those wild features. So, I mean, when we're feeding them, we are influencing that. We are we're bringing them to us. We're providing a steady food source. And if they know that they've got a buffet in our gardens every night, why are they going to go out foraging? It will change how they behave. I mean, I would love to say to everyone, don't feed, just put in ponds, put in loads of flowers, get the diversity in your garden going, like put in log piles, all these different structures, which will kind of create habitat for the inverts. And then when the inverts are there, the things that prey on the inverts, the birds, the hedgehogs, they'll come in. But unfortunately, sometimes people don't have access to that. You know, we've all got patios and drives, and some people have got flats. So if we're feeding them, it's just about feeding them in the right way and trying to make sure when we're doing it, we're making the right choice. We're trying to provide something as well as just food. So like if you are providing food and you don't have a pond, whack in a pond. It will draw all the hedgehogs in the area to your garden because they need access to water. So little things like that you can do as well as feeding to kind of help to increase the biodiversity in our gardens and still look after the animals that are already there, I think. I can't tell everyone to stop feeding them because they won't be happy with me. And people will feed them regardless. So just, you got to feed them the right way, you know.
I think on that note, it's 8 o'clock. We should probably stop.
Okay.
So Lee, thank you for a really fantastic talk. Fascinating, beautifully presented. I love your slides. You get perfectly to time.
Okay. I was looking at the timer here and I was thinking how many. Yeah. So basically, when I started initially, I started it because I thought, oh, we haven't got any data on hedgehogs feeding in modern times, so let's collect some data. But now I've set it up. We are a community interest company, so it's a project in its own right. We've got a bank account, we've got outreach, we do things. So it's going to continue as long as it has its own steam. We're looking for funders so that we can get the project kind of out to a wider audience and make sure that we've got the kind of financial stability to keep it going long term. Because I'd love, in 5 years' time, we're going to have all this data on how they're behaving urban gardens, and then we can compare it scientifically to our past data, and we can see how different their behavior is and how different they are now to how they were in the past. So the project is going to continue. I will become a PhD doctor and the project will carry on.
Well, I'm very glad that you're running up. PhD.
Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed. So round of applause for
Thank you.